The sky over Poland, 1939. Engines drone somewhere above the clouds. Then silence. A lone formation banks into the sun at 12,000 feet. The canopy rattles as the pilot tightens his harness. Sweat drips beneath his goggles. His gloved thumb flips a switch. And then it begins. A mechanical wail splits the air, a shrieking, rising scream that claws through the sky before the aircraft even appears. Civilians below freeze. Soldiers dive for cover. Horses bolt. Anti-aircraft crews scramble. The nose drops. 80 degrees. Nearly vertical. The altimeter unwinds violently. Wind tears against the fuselage. The world becomes a spinning tunnel of earth and smoke. The pilot grips the stick as gravity crushes him into the seat. This is not a fighter. It is not a bomber in the traditional sense. It is a weapon designed to terrorize before it kills. Inside the cockpit of the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, the screaming dive is not chaos. It is calculated precision. And for a time, it reshaped how wars were fought from the air. This is the story of the aircraft that turned fear into strategy, and the men who rode it straight down into hell. The pilot steadies the aircraft at altitude. Oxygen mask tight against his face. The intercom crackles. Short, clipped German commands. Below, the front line is a jagged scar of smoke and artillery flashes. He pushes the nose forward. For a split second there is weightlessness. Then gravity takes over. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka tilts past 60 degrees, 70, nearly vertical. The dive brakes deploy with a metallic shudder. Wind shrieks across struts and rivets. The Jericho Trumpets begin their mechanical howl, a sound engineered not for aerodynamics, but for fear. The earth rises violently in the windscreen. Fields become squares. Roads become threads. Troops scatter like shadows. Anti-aircraft guns swivel upward too late. Black bursts of flak bloom around the descending aircraft, but the pilot stays locked on target. Training takes over. Range, speed, altitude, release point. The Stuka was designed around this moment. Unlike horizontal bombers that relied on formation mass, the Ju-87 attacked alone in sequence, each aircraft committing fully to its dive. Accuracy replaced saturation. One bomb. One target. One violent plunge. Inside the cockpit, everything compresses. The altimeter spins downward. 6,000 feet. 4,000, 2,000. The target fills the glass. A bridge abutment. A bunker slit. A column of armor jammed on a narrow road. Bomb release. The aircraft jolts upward as the load separates. A split second later, the automatic pull-out system engages. The pilot strains against crushing G-force as the Stuka claws back toward the sky. Vision narrows. Blood drains from the head. The world dims at the edges. Below impact, a concussive blast rips through earth and steel. Smoke towers upward. The scream fades as the aircraft climbs, banking hard to rejoin formation. Behind it, chaos. For the soldiers beneath that dive, the Stuka was not just an airplane. It was anticipation. Dread stretched thin between sound and explosion. A psychological weapon delivered through altitude and angle. And for the Luftwaffe in 1939 and 1940, it was proof that air power could be surgical, devastating without being indiscriminate. The screaming dive was not an act of desperation. It was doctrine. And it would carve its mark across Europe before the skies began to change. Why the Stuka mattered. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Blitzkrieg was more than a theory. It was choreography, armor, infantry, artillery, and air power moving as one. At the center of that airborne hammer was the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. Designed in the mid-1930s under the guidance of Ernst Udet, the Stuka was built for one purpose: precision dive bombing. Unlike level bombers that dropped payloads from altitude and hoped for accuracy, the Stuka attacked like a hawk. It climbed, rolled inverted, and plunged almost vertically toward its target before releasing bombs at terrifyingly low altitude. Bridges, tanks, rail lines, bunkers, nothing was safe. During the invasions of Poland and later France in 1940, Stuka units such as Sturzkampf Geschwader II and 77 operated in close coordination with advancing panzer divisions. When ground forces stalled, Stukas were called in by radio. Minutes later, the sky screamed. This was close air support refined into a brutal art form. 2. Technical advantages. At first glance, the Stuka seemed outdated. Fixed landing gear. Angular gull wings. Maximum speed around 240 miles per hour. Slow compared to modern fighters. But speed was not its weapon. Precision was. The Ju-87 could dive at angles up to 80 degrees. Automatic dive brakes prevented overspeeding. A pull-out recovery system engaged if the pilot blacked out under G-force. Bomb release altitude could drop below 1,500 feet, ensuring near-direct hits. Its standard payload: 1 500 kg bomb under the fuselage, 4 50 kg bombs under the wings. Later variants, like the Ju-87G, carried 37 mm anti-tank cannons, flown by aces such as Hans-Ulrich Rudel on the Eastern Front. Its psychological weapon, however, was the Jericho Trumpet, wind-driven sirens mounted on the landing gear that produced the infamous wail during dives. It did not just destroy infrastructure. It shattered morale. 3. A combat story, France, 1940. May 1940. The Meuse River. French defensive positions held firm against advancing German armor. Artillery pounded crossing points. The river churned with chaos. Then came the Stukas. At 10,000 feet, staffel after staffel formed into attack columns. They rolled over in sequence. Dive brakes extended. Sirens screamed. French anti-aircraft guns opened fire, flak bursting in black clouds around descending aircraft. Inside the cockpit, vibration intensified. The target bridge filled the windscreen. The bombardier called range. Release. Bombs fell true. Explosions tore through artillery nests and defensive lines. Smoke swallowed the riverbank. Within hours, German engineers established crossings. The breakthrough at Sedan followed, one of the decisive moments of the campaign. The Stuka had not won the battle alone. But without it, the river may have held. For enemy perspective. To British troops in 1940, the sound came first. A distant mechanical howl that grew into a descending shriek. Soldiers described it as the scream of death. Civilians fled at its approach. During the evacuation at Dunkirk, Stuka raids harassed troops pinned on the beaches, forcing men to scatter with each dive. Yet the aircraft had a weakness. Without air superiority, the Stuka was vulnerable. During the Battle of Britain, Royal Air Force fighters like the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane tore into slow, exposed Stuka formations. Losses mounted rapidly in August 1940. Within weeks, the aircraft was withdrawn from operations over Britain. The terror weapon had limits. It ruled only when the skies belonged to Germany. 5. Strategic impact. In the early years of World War II, the Stuka was the embodiment of blitzkrieg. It allowed fast-moving ground forces to punch through fortified lines. It turned tactical coordination into devastating momentum. On the Eastern Front, it adapted again, hunting tanks, supply columns, and artillery. In North Africa, it struck Allied shipping and desert strongpoints. But war evolves. By 1943, faster Allied fighters and improved radar networks made daylight operations increasingly costly. The Stuka transitioned to night missions and secondary roles. Yet its early impact cannot be overstated. It proved that close air support, integrated, precise, relentless, could break armies not just physically but psychologically. The scream was strategy. By 1941, on the vast plains of the Soviet Union, the Stuka found new purpose. Vast distances demanded endurance. Soviet armored formations presented dense, high-value targets. Modified variants like the Ju-87D and later the cannon-armed Ju-87G adapted to this brutal theater. Flying low over the steppe, Stuka pilots hunted tanks with near-predatory focus. The aircraft's stability in dive made it ideal for anti-armor precision strikes. But conditions were unforgiving. Soviet flak grew heavier. Fighters such as the Yak and Lag series contested the airspace more aggressively as the Red Air Force recovered from early losses. Each mission demanded tight coordination with escorts. Without them, the Stuka's slow speed made it exposed. Still, in sectors where German air superiority held, even temporarily, the scream returned. And wherever it echoed, defensive lines buckled under concentrated aerial assault. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka was never the fastest aircraft of the war. It was not the most advanced by 1945. It did not dominate the skies like later fighters or heavy bombers. But in 1939 and 1940, it changed everything. It redefined how air power supported ground war. It demonstrated that precision, timing, and terror could amplify military force beyond simple bomb tonnage. It became the audible symbol of blitzkrieg, a mechanical scream that announced collapse before the first explosion. Inside its cockpit, pilots endured crushing G-forces, flak bursts, and fighter interception. They flew straight into anti-aircraft fire by design. The dive was not reckless, it was disciplined, calculated, repeated. And yet, as the war shifted, so did the balance of power in the air. Air superiority became decisive. Aircraft built for terror without speed or defensive agility could not survive against modern interception. The Stuka's arc mirrors Germany's early war momentum: rapid, overwhelming, seemingly unstoppable, followed by gradual attrition under industrial and technological pressure. But history remembers the sound. The siren wail over Warsaw, the vertical plunge over Sedan, the shadow crossing the beaches at Dunkirk. It was an aircraft built to make the sky itself feel hostile. Today, restored examples sit silent in museums. Their landing gear no longer carries screaming sirens. Their propellers no longer cut through flak-filled air. Yet when historians speak of blitzkrieg, the image is immediate: gull wings folding into a dive, a bomb separating cleanly from its rack, a nation on the ground bracing for impact. The Stuka did not win the war. But for a moment in time, it taught the world what modern coordinated air power could do, and what it felt like to hear it coming. And long after the engines stopped, the echo of that dive still hangs in the history of the Second World War, a scream frozen in descent. As the war ground into its later years, the role of the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka narrowed. The skies over Europe grew crowded with faster, more heavily armed fighters. Radar networks tightened. Allied industrial output flooded the air with aircraft designed not merely to defend, but to dominate. The Stuka's design philosophy belonged to a specific moment in warfare. It thrived in environments where air superiority was secured, where coordination between ground and air was precise, and where shock could tip fragile defensive lines into collapse. But modern air combat punished vulnerability. Fixed landing gear and modest speed were liabilities in contested airspace. And yet, even as losses mounted, Stuka crews continued flying. They flew at low altitude over Kursk's burning armor fields. They attacked supply routes across the Mediterranean. They operated in shrinking pockets where German forces clung to defensive ground. The dive bomber that once spearheaded invasion now fought to delay inevitable retreat. Its evolution tells a broader story about technological momentum in total war. Early innovation can create overwhelming tactical advantage. But adaptation, industrial, strategic, and doctrinal, determines longevity. The Stuka was a scalpel in a phase of warfare that rewarded speed and terror. As the conflict matured into attrition and air supremacy battles, the scalpel faced sledgehammers. Still, legacy is not measured solely by survival. The Ju-87 imprinted itself on military doctrine worldwide. Post-war air forces studied its dive-bombing accuracy. Close air support would become a foundational concept in modern combined arms warfare. Later aircraft, faster, armored, and jet-powered, would inherit its mission profile if not its silhouette. And always, historians return to the sound. The siren was eventually removed in many variants. It reduced speed and offered little tactical value once the shock effect faded. But by then, the psychological impact had already entered history. The scream had become myth. Inside that cockpit, the experience was intensely human. Sweat on the brow. Instruments vibrating. The calculated decision to dive straight into defensive fire for the sake of precision. The Stuka's story is not simply about machinery. It is about a moment when the sky itself became an instrument of intimidation, when warfare descended almost vertically, screaming through the clouds before striking with devastating accuracy. Long after the engines fell silent, the image remains: gull wings folding downward, nose pointed at earth, gravity harnessed as a weapon. A scream. A dive. An impact that echoed far beyond the battlefield.